Here we are in leadership gossip. So, if you have watched my other category on gossip, I talked about how important it is to also get the fundamentals on how to handle gossip when it deals with particularly leadership accountability and how to manage when something has gone awry within leadership. So, let's dive on in. We want to look at three different kinds of problems that happen inside leadership. Problem number one is a staff rumor. A staff rumor is maybe something that's happening internally or conversation that's happening externally about your internal staff. It may be a leadership style, it may be a communication style, it may be just, you know, between two staff members and how they manage to play well with each other or not play well with each other. But that's problem number one. So problem number two is church leadership split rumors. And this could be because they think someone's about to leave or they've heard some things. And we are not new to the concept of someone leaving a church and going and planting a church just a block down the street. So there is some warrant to how do we handle situations like that. Problem number three is personal accusations. Personal accusations are about your leadership, but they are about things that are happening in their personal lives. They don't necessarily dictate or have anything to do with how things are happening on grounds. And so what tends to happen in this particular category is that the church kind of feels like, well, I don't know how involved we should get, because if it's not happening here, then is it really any of our business? And we're going to dive into that. So the first thing, the most obvious but painfully annoying thing that I have to point out, because I think sometimes we forget that there is a human component to everything that we do. And each person that is in a position of leadership, each person that is conversing about leadership, they're all human. They all have their own personal childhood experiences, life traumas. They're coming in with their own already preset viewpoints on how people should handle and conduct themselves in any particular situation. And what I've found is that most people think they know what they would do in one particular situation. They'd go, oh, well, if I was over that, I would do da 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 da. Or if I was in that position, then I wouldn't have ever allowed blah, 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 blah to happen. But what tends to happen is that we have no clue what self-preservation skills will disappear in the moment of crisis. So we may tell ourselves all these things like, I'm going to do this, or I would react like this, or this is what I would say. The truth of the matter is, under high stress circumstances, and particularly in instances where you think this will never happen to me. It'll never happen to me. It'll never happen to my kids. It'll never happen to my family. It'll never happen in my church. When it does happen, you're ill prepared because you have not played out the pre-mortem thinking that we heavily talk about, which is thinking about every possible problem that could go awry and then solving for them so that in the horrible case that one of those things happens, you're already mentally prepared to find the proper exits to keep everyone safe. So taking that human component of knowing there is a high likely of a group of people, and I don't care if it's 10 people or 10,000 people in your church, under your administration, your nonprofit, whatever it is, that you are going to have someone that does something that is of interest of conflict. And so that starts the wheels turning in the conversational standpoint. People start talking about it. People start rumoring, like, can you believe this happened or that happened? And so the people talking are human, the people that are going through it are human, and you yourself are human, and you're trying to navigate all of these human emotions and expectations. So when is it a good time to have the conversation about a conflict that is happening? And the answer to that is always immediately. It is never after we get through this event, after we get through this weekend, after we, whatever, after the summer, we'll deal with it. Whatever your hang up is about holding off dealing with it, you can absolutely tell yourself with 100% confidence it's going to get worse. And the reason why I say that is not because your lack of leadership, but because whenever you give the enemy a foothold, whenever you give him access, and especially to your leadership, he's going to take full advantage of that. So if there is a weak point, he's going to use that to his full advantage. So much like when a baby pukes on your shirt just as you're walking into church, or a dog pees in your back seat of the car right after a pit stop, there's never a convenient moment to pick up a mess. But when there is a mess, how do we do it? So let's talk about evolution of resolution. This is my process for how to handle internal conflicts and how to get results that actually are effective, that both protect the people that you care about in leadership and also protect the people that are being influenced, whether that is your congregation, your family. It could be you could be in a position of political leadership, and these are your constituents. So let's take a look. You have a mess on the church floor, and if you leave it alone, it will sour and it will smell and it will start to spread. And I say that because when something doesn't feel right, when something's a little off, you can guarantee you that someone is going to have this inclination that it's like, what is going on right now? Like, something is not right. I can feel it. Everyone's acting weird. Why is everyone acting weird? So even in the silence, even in the omission of the problem, there is already a stirring that is occurring, and you can guarantee that that will lead to people asking more questions, and more questions lead to misinformation because people only know bits and pieces of information, or bits and pieces of facts they've heard, or emotional information that they've heard. And so it starts to create a bigger mess. So inform the main group of people who have brought forth to you a concern, what your process is going to be to address this and stop the leak immediately. Stop it from infiltrating throughout the church by being, oh, that's interesting. Well, I'll look into that. Whenever you do that, I'll look into it, or we'll deal with that next week, or, send me an email about it. I'll get to it when I get to it. People start to feel like you're not taking them seriously. And when people feel like you're not taking them seriously, especially moms about their kids, I will say this, especially moms about their kids, they will start to talk, because I will get your attention whether you want my attention, whether you want attention or not, because it is that moment of like, no, you need to take me seriously. I'm really concerned about this, whatever it is. And so they start to have a bad attitude, or they start to just make suggested comments like, well, we don't go to that study anymore because, well, there's just, I don't know, there's issues there with the leadership that, I don't know, we just don't go anymore. And so then immediately people start going, well, what do you mean issues? What does issues mean? And so there starts this murmuring, there starts this gossip about what isn't said, because the leak wasn't stopped. The concern was not directly addressed. And how I like to say, like, what does that look like? Someone will say, what does that look like? How do I make people feel affirmed that I'm taking it seriously? One is never just passively go by something. If you think that information is like, that's not even a big deal, it's a big deal to them. So no matter what someone says, no matter what they're telling you, even if it seems so petty, even if it sounds so mundane, such a waste of time, all of the other adjectives that go along with information that is just so not worth your time and energy, I like to see physical identification. So physical identification looks like me physically taking a pen to physical paper and writing down someone's concern. showing that I am documenting what you are saying to me, and then I have every intention of following up with this. I have every intention of looking into this. Obviously, I'm walking the halls of the church right now, but I'm going to go back and I'm going to research this. I'm going to pray about it. We're going to look into it. We're going to see if there's any other information that goes alongside with this. Have we heard this from anybody else? Is this just this one person that feels this way? That kind of a thing. But when people see you physically do something, even if it's so simple as to writing something down, they feel like, wow, he's really doing something about it. She's really doing something about it. When you sit there and go, okay, yeah, let me think about that. And you walk away, it's such a passive aggressive notion to them that they are not that important. So that simple little thing could be the very thing that stops the leak. And then we get into step 2, which is clean up the spilled milk. If the spill was larger than you thought, it's time to air out the room. So many people will say, well, let's just see how this plays out, or let's just see if it goes away on its own. And that's not going to happen. And what happens is when it starts to really smell, when it starts to really become an issue, when people really start to feel like, okay, something's up. I know more now about the situation than I did, and I feel less comforted by it, then it starts to cause a hemorrhage in the church or in your administration or in whatever it is that you do. And that hemorrhage can be a lack of trust, which leads to a lack of attendance, lack of financial contributions, disengagement, all of the things we never ever want to see in the church. But people don't feel like they trust you right now, and so they don't really feel like they need to be engaging in the process because they too are going to wait this out. So when you play the waiting game, they play the waiting game. When you're like, well, we're going to see how this plays out, they're going to go, okay, well, we're going to see what you're going to do about it. And we'll wait to see what you're going to do about it before we make a decision about how much further we're going to go in this ministry or how much further we're going to go into this church. So your intentional leadership can really dictate whether or not you start to have a hemorrhage. People will say, well, I just don't understand why all of a sudden we lost 200 people. No, there was something along the way that was a clear communication to people that you are not leading in a direction they feel safe with. And that's why conversations were being had and people were leaving. And so that doesn't just occur overnight. It really doesn't. There is a process that is set in place internally within human nature to test the waters. And we do it for our own safety. And when we feel like we've tested the waters enough and there isn't enough there for us to feel fundamentally secure, then we move on. So step 3, air out the room. So make sure you address any big allegations. And I think that as leadership, there is this idea that airing out the room means, oh, you want me to get up on stage and call out somebody by name? No, that's not what I'm telling you to do. This lets them know you are trying to create an environment where this doesn't occur in the future on church grounds. So anything that is occurring within leadership that causes question of concern with safety is an immediate you have to address. And so even if the address isn't identifying the problem, the communication needs to be identifying a new solution. So you may get up on a Sunday morning and say, hey, let's just say, for example, there's an accusation that, something's going on in the high school ministry, and maybe they're a little uneasy about, kids hanging out in one particular area or whatever it is. You don't have to say, we've heard that this is happening, because I get it. You fear that all the other people who don't know what's going on are like, wait, what's going on? What's happening? Why didn't I know about this? So what you say is you just go directly into the implementation of the new boundaries and protocols, which is, I just want everyone to feel secure with your junior high and high schoolers. We have implemented new security measures. So you may see people installing new cameras, just to feel I just want you to feel that we are doing this for the safety of everyone. I don't want anyone to wonder what's going on. I'll tell you exactly what's going on. We're going to have 6 new cameras put in, and we're doing this because we want everyone to feel very secure about our facility and where the kids are able to go or not go and who's allowed into those access points. So this just makes people go like, oh, great. I love to see money being spent. Again, that physicality. Money's being spent on security protocols, on safety protocols. You are directly addressing a concern without directly addressing a concern. And you are implementing something that shows progression. So that can assure people that this is a place I want to be. Maybe it's not perfect, but it is willing to grow. It's learning. It is listening to our concerns. It's taking them into consideration. It's implementing new processes for our safety. So moving on, I hope you never need to do step 4, but if you need to do step 4, it is ripping out the carpet. You've tried to stop the leak. You've tried to clean up the milk. You tried to air out the room, but it's not working. And so you have got to rip out the carpet. Some people think they can fire someone and just move on. And that is the absolute worst thing that you can do. Because one, if you do not fully disclose the reasoning or assure the congregation in the move, you could unintentionally cause a split. You could unintentionally make that person's version of the story feel valid, because the other person's going to feel very valid going around saying, I was fired because, da 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 da. And all of a sudden people feel bad for them and they go with them, and you're going, yeah, that's not what happened. So when you have to be on the, yeah, that's not what happened side, you're immediately on defense. And being on defense is the worst place that you can be at. It's usually, unfortunately, where I get a majority of my clients. They're on defense. They don't know how to get off. They have a hemorrhage. They are completely consumed with the smell and stench of something that has occurred, and they don't know what to do. And so the number one rule here is to get off defense, to always be on offense. And to be on offense is to be the leader of the conversation, to be the leader of the narrative. And the narrative is never a negative narrative. I want to be really clear about that. It is not getting up and land blasting somebody else, because again, you can unintentionally cause a split, because people will go, I know that person, and that person would never do this or that or whatever. And so you want to make your place feel the safest, the most evolved, the most, just encourage them. If you're removing a youth leader, then tell them, we are positive that this new administration that we are implementing is going to be even more successful. They're going to be more involved into understanding this current generation. Just make it seem like it's a very natural progression, that it's something that needed to happen, something that was bound to happen, something that was just moving in that direction. Don't make it sound like a sudden decision or an instinctual or emotional decision. Don't make it come across like you emotionally reacted and fired someone and then they feel really bad for the guy. So, like I said, just making sure that you are communicating something when the process has happened, someone has had to be removed. And if someone is just naturally moving on, let's just say they're just moving on to a better opportunity, they're just going on, then really emphasize that. Like, have a going away party, bring them up, pray over them and their new ministry opportunity. Don't let it just passively go, because then people are going to go, we really loved the old youth leader and then you got rid of him. And you're like, wait, I didn't get rid of him. He took another opportunity. So that can be really difficult for us when we are trying to communicate a change, if we have to then defend ourselves. Again, you're on defense, you're trying to get it back on offense. And so it can be a hard place to be. And so just don't be there. Just be ahead of it. Make sure that you are always, even if you're really mad about someone taking on another job and leaving, still play it off like you're super happy for them and that you are excited for their new adventure and their new venture. What is the target? How do we keep or regain trust or safety? Let's say you have gone through a crisis in your particular ministry or your church, your nonprofit. and you're past all of the things you could have done in a proactive state. You're like, I wish I would have known all of that information before. Unfortunately, I didn't. We're in a huge mess. We've lost half our congregation. People aren't, putting their kids in childcare, or maybe it's the people aren't tithing because we had a financial issue. Whatever the crisis is, you've seen some kind of hemorrhage occur, and you're in the hemorrhage, or you're outside of the hemorrhage at this point. The hemorrhage has stopped, but you've still lost a lot of blood, and you're wondering how you get it back because you're lacking some life, you're lacking some growth, and you are not conveying trust to the public in a positive way. And so, again, doing nothing doesn't give time to heal. I hear this a lot where people say, oh, time heals everything. No, it does not. No, it does not. Well, not when it comes to narrative, not when it comes to crisis. It absolutely does not restore trust. It does not restore safety. You have to do that. You physically have to implement those things that restore that connection between you and people. And so I do not want you to think that time heals everything, because it doesn't. People may still stick with you. They may still be with you through tough times. And after a couple of years of realizing, man, they really didn't handle that well, and they have done nothing to change what's going on, and it keeps happening over and over. I can't make excuses for them anymore. I'm leaving. I am going to leave. And so you don't always see the hemorrhage right out the gate. You don't always see the damage right at the beginning. You may see a little bit, but then it may be a trickle effect. You may look 10 years down the line and realize, oh my gosh, how did we get here? And it's because you really didn't regain that trust and implement that safety. And so I give the example of, let's just say you're out in the parking lot and you hear gunshots. Absolutely standing still and doing nothing doesn't do anything but cause more panic. But if somebody comes along the way and grabs your hand and takes you into a building and locks the door behind you and pushes you down underneath the desk and is like, okay, we're going to stay here. Does it take away the threat? No. Do we know if it's a complete and absolute bulletproof situation? Absolutely not. But you feel as though that person is leading you to safety. You feel as though they are trying. They are making an effort to put you in a safer situation. And so that's what we want to do in these situations. That's what we really want to convey with our actions, with our words, is that we don't know if we're implementing resources that are bulletproof. We don't know if we're going to be able to stop the bleed. We don't know these things because we don't understand the depths of the damage. But what we do know is you can't put a Band-Aid on cancer. You cannot just assume that it's naturally going to work its way out of the body. Once it's in there, it's in there. Once it's in your congregation, it's in your congregation. And it may stick around for years and decades and so on and so forth. And so you really have to get on it immediately and do everything that you can to rectify the situation with the parties at hand. So let's talk about the biblical principles. First of all, I just think that everybody just needs to read 1 Timothy if you're in any way, shape, or form in a position of leadership, any way, shape, or form is thinking about going into ministry, thinking about doing anything in the ministry. It's a must. It's a no-brainer. This alongside Titus, it's a must. He must also have a good reputation with outsiders so that he will not fall into disgrace and into the devil's trap. So really what we have to look at is sometimes we're so focused on it doesn't matter what people think of me. It matters what God thinks of me. Yeah, but not when you're in leadership. Sorry, that doesn't work. So that's really what 1 Timothy is about, is you got to stay above reproach. You've got to put all these things in place. You've got to do all of these things that keep you accountable, because the fallback of God loves me no matter what doesn't work when you're in leadership. So 1 Timothy 4:14, do not neglect your gift, which was given to you through prophecy when the body of elders laid their hands on you. So, don't be discouraged. Don't be sitting here going, I'm I'm just going to let God do this. No, he's given you the gifts to be able to navigate through difficult times. He's given you the gifts to be able to guide people through some really unorthodox situations and processes that nobody wants to go through. But if you read any of the New Testament, these guys didn't wake up every day in a perfect situation. They didn't walk through rose petals and welcome parties wherever they went. So, you're not alone. You are given the tools for success, and, you got to use them. And when you're dealing with the personal side of things, 1 Timothy 3, he must manage his own family well and see that his children obey him, and he must do so in a manner worthy of full respect. So it's not just about what you say when you say it. It's also about how you say it, because that connection with people, that passive of like, you're not in leadership, like you don't get it, you're not on staff, or like, whatever. When we start to treat people with this disconnect, this like, we're here and you're here and we're going to make decisions that affect you, but we're going to treat any concerns that you have with, non-validity. And so when that occurs, then you're going to immediately see a disconnect, because they've lost respect for you. And so we really have to manage our homes, manage our leadership, manage everything that we do to where, listen, people, I always live by this. People are not always going to like what you say. They're not always going to like what you do. In fact, I'm probably hated more than I'm loved. But I will say this, even with my worst enemies, they really do respect me. And they respect me because I've always leaned on truth. Even when I've been a hard person to work with, when I have been diligently driving home a point and they're sitting here going, you're not being very nice about it, or, that's not the way we do things, or whatever it is. I've always been very staunch about truth. I've always been very staunch about honesty. And I've always been essentially validated by things being exposed into the future. And so when they look at my process, they don't love it, because they would much rather me compromise for kindness. But they do have a lot of respect for me, because they know that I do things by the book. They know that I do things well. And so be that person. In women's leadership, in the same way, the women are to be worthy of respect, not going around maliciously talking, but temperate and trustworthy in everything. 1 Timothy 3:11. So, this is not specific to women. I want to be very clear. Men have a tendency, like I said, to share information with this kind of passive notion that like it's not really that big of a deal, and then it gets around as well. And men can be hurt by misinformation as well, especially when it's business or financially oriented. We heard so-and-so's business isn't doing well. That can be really, really, really hurtful. It can be really harmful. Men just tend to do things on a more legal notion. So they're more likely to, sue you for, going around and speaking bad about their business. But women take things on a more emotional level. Regardless, I just wanted to be really clear that women tend to share more. And so when we are sharing and we are opening up and we are being vulnerable, make sure that our vulnerability is our own vulnerability, that we're being vulnerable to share our story, and that we protect those stories, and that we aren't sharing things that don't involve us personally. So when we're talking about wages, when we're talking about the process of the internal process, 1 Timothy 5:18 through 22 is a great reference, because it really gets into the process of defending yourself when it comes to wages. Sometimes in leadership, so many times we'll say, oh, well, the pastor drives a blah, 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 blah car, or, why did the church purchase this? And the pastor's family gets to use it, or like, we hear all kinds of stuff or whatever. Solution number one, first scripture says, do not muzzle an ox while it's treading out the grain, and the worker deserves his wages. So I used to bring in a lot of different guest worship artists to our church. I was really big about finding new and evolving worship leaders that were just super talented, but maybe unknown. And I always wanted to pay them. And my mother's philosophy was always, of course, we're going to pay the soldiers who go out first in battle, And people would kind of give us a hard time about that because they're like, we just don't think we should have to pay for them. And this was a verse that she always reminded people is in there. And I don't think people talk about it enough. It's like, ministry is ministry. But when you're working, when you're putting in the time, when you're leading people in a way that is for the kingdom, the worker deserves his wages. So don't abuse volunteers. Don't abuse the idea of, well, you come to the church, you should just do it. No mandatory service, like things like that can be really difficult because they do start to murmur about it. It can cause conflict within the church. It can cause issues of like, why am I working more than I see the pastor here and I'm not getting paid? And then it starts its own conflict. So just be really careful about how you balance what people want to do and what you're asking of people. Solution 2 is do not entertain an accusation against an elder unless it is brought by 2 or 3 witnesses. Again, kind of going back to what I was talking about at the very beginning. When it comes to leadership, or maybe I talked about it in the last gossip segment. Sorry, my segments are getting mixed up. But ultimately, I really want to be clear that leadership accountability looks violently different than 2 people who are just processing communication and are miscommunicating or, whatever it may be. Leadership, if we see a red flag, typically most of the time, unless it's emotional is like, I feel like that person should have said something that way. That's an emotional aspect, and you can agree or disagree with someone's approach or tone. But most of the time when you see a true red flag, like I'm seeing this married person on staff spending too much time with this married person on staff, and they're doing way too much together, and it's starting to look bad, then typically there's other people who are seeing it as well. And when you've heard it once and you've heard it twice, that third one should definitely be like, okay, 3 strikes, we've got a problem. But typically, you want to keep track of it. That's another reason why I write it down. Write it down because you're like, yeah, I've heard this before. Where have I heard this before? Oh, so-and-so told me about this like 2 months ago. So now I'm hearing it again. So now we really do need to address it. And it could be in regards to tithing as well. Like if, people aren't managing the money well, or you're starting to see something, or, the same person's taking the money every week, or, just always keep yourself in the thought process of accountability. Like, what are people processing when they see us? Is this communicating something negative? Do we need to be concerned about this? Solution 3, but those elders who are sinning, you are to reprove before everyone so that the others may take warning. I charge you in the sight of God and Christ Jesus and the elect angels to keep these instructions without partiality and to do nothing out of favoritism. This one's really, really big. Like, I can't emphasize enough, if I could give someone one scripture reference, it would be this verse in 1 Timothy 5, because I really think we pick and choose how we want to discipline certain people. And certain people on staff who've maybe been there a long time or are a close friend, we tend to, not correct as much, or we're like, well, they did a favor for me, so I'm doing a favor for them. Or you show some level of favoritism, some level of like, this person's allowed to have this sin in their life because, well, they do a lot for us, or they give us a lot of money, or whatever it may be. And so you have to be really, really careful that we have a set of standards for leadership. Again, I can't emphasize this enough. I am not talking about Bob sitting in the third row. I am talking specifically about leadership, that accountability is clearly laid out in 1 Timothy. It is clearly laid out in Titus. There's no ifs, ands, and buts about it. And it says to implement these instructions without partiality. So you don't get to pick and choose which parts you want to do. You don't get to pick and choose who gets to, be the rule breaker and who doesn't get to be the rule breaker. Sorry, that's just not the way it works. And we've seen the impact of this favoritism because we really have seen that, well, we can't say anything to this pastor because, well, they have a really big following. Or we can't say anything to this person because, well, they sell a lot of our resources or whatever it may be. So we've seen the impact of how people just don't care. They don't care. A new generation has come in. And so now here's what the impact looks like. In this current study that was just recently done, this is the percentages of people who never come to church, seldom come to church, once a month or every week. Those numbers are absolutely horrific. This is out of control as far as I can see. And I really do believe that people feel that it's safer for them to either just watch church online because they don't have to be involved in the drama. They don't have to be involved in the gossip. They don't have to be worried about church hurt. They don't have to be worried about getting hurt. And so I feel like they're really disconnected because of fear of safety. I think that it is truly an identifying factor, and it's not just a COVID safety issue. It was an excuse to say, you know what, I've felt like this environment is toxic for a while. This is an excuse for me to pull back, to try a different church, to maybe try church online, or to just disengage from this altogether. And a lot of them will find that it's like, they're like, you know what, I'm just kind of glad not to be in the middle of it anymore. Like I feel relieved. And I hate that. I hate that people feel relieved not being in church because somehow it's safer. That's a horrible narrative. It's one that we have to work aggressively to regain the trust of people to come back. And the only way to do that is to implement procedures that make people physically feel the difference. Let them allow them to see a visible change. And when people can see that you are spending money, that you are doing things that are creating not just aesthetically pleasing. I am not talking about putting in more aesthetically pleasing things. Okay. Let me be really clear. I'm talking about implementing very qualified staff, very resourceful information, providing them access and opportunity for growth, not engaging in cliques and not engaging in division and dissension. And all of those things can be done physically. So my scripture reference here is do not be hasty in laying on. Sorry, I can't read today. Apparently, do not be hasty in the laying on of hands, and do not share in the sins of others. Keep yourself pure. 1 Timothy 5:22. Be a positive impact. The sins of some are obvious, reaching the place of judgment ahead of them. The sins of others trail behind them. In the same way, good deeds are obvious, and even those that are not obvious cannot remain hidden forever. 1 Timothy 5:24-25. So what I hear a lot of times is, I've seen really, really horrible people not have to pay the consequences of their sins, and not they get to stay in leadership, or they get to stay on staff somewhere. And how is that fair? And I always just kind of smile and laugh because I'm like, well, first of all, I've seen some pretty crazy things happen to people who think they're above God. God is never like missing someone, like, oh, I missed that person making that sin. Thanks for bringing that to my attention. He knows what's going on. And in time, people don't always get to walk in their hidden sin. So just give it time. Stay focused on what you can stay focused on. And if it's a safety issue, if it's something that you feel, I don't understand why that person's still in leadership. Why are you still at that church? Like, find a place that makes sense for you and your family. I am definitely not one to ever just say blindly follow your pastor and blindly follow your leadership because, they'll know what to do. listen, if they're not implementing the scripture, if you've read First Timothy, if you've read Titus, if you know what accountability is supposed to look like, if you know what leadership is supposed to look like, and you're not seeing that in your leadership, and they're using and abusing their opportunity, then, you know, move on. Let the numbers affect them in that way. But yeah, I mean, that's really all I can say to that. If you're dealing with church hurt because of instances that have happened on grounds or with leadership in their personal life, and you've just really been discouraged by that, then I want you to feel encouraged that, yeah, people don't always get it right. Going back to, slide 2, humans are humans, but you can feel confidence that God is doing something with you, and you can only control you. And if you've done everything that you can to bring forth a concern and it's not being acknowledged, find a place that you feel safe worshiping the Lord and having your kids and your family, or, you feel that you're growing, because that's really what he wants from you. He doesn't want blind submission. So be where you can grow. I hope this was helpful to you. I really appreciate you going through another tough subject with me, and I'll see you on the next one.